so many drugs. One of the drugs they gave him in June 2010 was a drug called Klonopin. My son, and the side effect of Klonopin is suicide for some. My son took that drug, and a week later was his first suicide attempt. He took all his pills that the VA gave him, parked his truck in the woods, and was just ready to die. He called me at 11:30 that night here at home, and he said, "I just wanted to tell you I love you, Mom." I said, "I love you too, honey." And he said, "And I'm sorry." I said, "What are you sorry for, honey?" He said, "I'm sorry, Mom, I can't take the pain anymore." And I said, I know, honey, I know it hurts, but we'll make it through. And he says, "No, Mom, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to live anymore. I don't want to feel this pain anymore." And of course, I started screaming, and he just said calmly, "Let me talk to Justin, my brother." So I ran across the house, and I said, "Justin," and he was already awake because he heard me screaming. He got on the phone, and I just said, "Find out where he is." And he just said, "Justin, I love you, and I'm sorry." And he hung up the phone. Well, I called his friend up in North Carolina, and through GPS, they located Johnny's truck, and just as he stopped breathing, they found him. The next day, I flew up to Camp Lejeune. My son was in ICU with a breathing tube down his throat and tied to the bed. We didn't know if there was any damage from all the drugs he swallowed, and we waited. They said they had to, before they took the breathing tube out, they had to make sure that he could breathe on his own, so they had to wake him up. And they didn't know what was the best scenario, so they brought me in there, and they woke him up. And when my son saw me, you know, his eyes went like this, and the first thing my son said was, "Why am I still here?" He was so angry. And for a mother, I was saying, "Thank God you're still here." But he just didn't want to live. He didn't want to feel the pain. I left the hospital room. I went back with his father and his brother, and we just waited until he was released from ICU. And then we went into his room, and we just stayed in his room with him. And of course, all of his buddies, all of his comrades came and tried to give him words of encouragement. And then when he was released, well, of course, I'm terrified that he's just going to do it again. So I didn't understand how they could just release him. And what they did is they gave him a battle buddy. Derek Bartek stayed with him 24/7. And then as time passed, they put him in the Wounded Warrior Battalion. But again, still taking so much medication. Then he called me, and he seemed to be doing pretty well. And he said, "Mom," they said I could have a service dog. And he said, "I want to make Kobe, my puppy." He said, "Do you think I could have Kobe for my service dog?" And I said, "You can have whatever you want, honey." I said, "Of course you can." So he came down to visit for a weekend, took Kobe back up with him, and he actually trained with the trainers up there, Kobe to be a service dog. Kobe was trained to wake him up from his nightmares. If Johnny would go into a crowded room, Kobe would sit behind him because he had his back, If somebody approached Johnny, Kobe would like be a divider, like don't come any closer. And then if the room got too crowded, Kobe could sense Johnny becoming anxious, and he would find the shortest route out of the room. It was pretty awesome. So Johnny seemed to be doing pretty good. He seemed to be doing pretty good. Yeah, he was doing good. He was still drinking a little bit too much, but he was working on that. You know, everything seemed to be good. Then he met a girl. Things were really good. So when he got out November 2011. He was actually medically retired with severe PTSD and TBI. And his girlfriend Lauren was going to school in Orlando. And so the two of them moved there and for about 6 months until she graduated. And then they moved back home, and Johnny moved here and Lauren moved in with her parents. I know it was really rough for Lauren. Well, Kobe and they never lived together, you know, of course, so it was hard. I know it was very hard for her. So they came home, and I remember when Johnny was sitting here at home, as soon as it would start to get dark, all the windows and doors had to be shut and locked. And of course, this was in the cooler months, because otherwise the windows are always shut and locked in South Florida. But also the drapes had to be drawn. We had guns hidden all over the house. We had a gun in the piano bench. We had a gun up on the shelf. He always had a gun by his side. Guns all over his bedroom. He was always ready. He was always ready for the fight, which I think is perfectly natural after living in a war zone for 6 months or 12 months, 6 and 6. Always being on the go, always looking, if we would go out in a place that had a lot of people, he was always scanning the room for danger. Always on, he was hypervigilant. Always did see things that weren't there. Mm-hmm. Actually, when he was still in North Carolina, he had called me one night, told me of an incident, and I said, Johnny, I don't believe that anybody was there. Do you think you could have imagined it or dreamed it? One night he went out, and he had my car, and he came home. It was like midnight, and I heard the garage door open, so I was waiting for him to come in. And he didn't come in, so I went out there, and I said, and he's hiding. The garage door was open, and he was against the wall, and he had his gun. And I'm like, Johnny, what are you doing? He said, Mom, somebody followed me. And I said, Johnny, there's nobody coming down the street, because I live in a private community. I said, there's nobody coming down the street. And I said, if somebody's following you, you need to come in the house and close the garage door. Mm-hmm. Get in the house now. And I had to get in the house. And then he eventually came in. There was a few of those things. Sometimes he would have nightmares. He had a nightmare. Also, this is also a side effect from the mefloquine. You have vivid nightmares. So he had a nightmare that maybe it was a repeat of what happened in Afghanistan, but his buddy stepped on an IED, exploded, and he was covered with his buddy's blood and body. Well, when he woke up, he was soaking wet, so he thought it was the blood, and he ran into the shower to wash the blood off, but what it was his sweat. Mm-hmm. But he thought it was, he thought he was back on the battlefield. If we would go out in public and somebody would bump into him, he would go off, and he would yell. When he yelled, it would make the insides of me shudder. And it's hard for me to say some of these things, because when I was going through them, I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want anybody to know that my son that he was different. I just wanted everybody to know that he was okay. And that's part of the problem. I know so many other mothers and wives out there are walking on eggshells in their house. and they're embarrassed. I don't know if the word is ashamed. I'm not gonna say that I was, no, there was no shame. I just didn't know. I didn't know that this is post-traumatic stress. And we need all these mothers and wives to speak up. Because this post-traumatic stress, us being quiet about it, is what's killing our warfighters. Other friends, that's what's killing them. My friend Fred, he lost his son. He actually took his life in Afghanistan. And when I found out about that, because he died before my son, I called Fred, and he was only 19, his son. And I told him, I said, I'm so sorry. But when I lost Johnny, I called him that night and I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Fred. Because nobody knows that pain. You can't share. There's some things you just can't share with everybody. But